I'd been working the overnight security shift at Chicago's Field Museum for exactly 9 days when I found the note. The locker assignment was routine. Charlotte Gilbert, the day shift supervisor, handed me the key on my first evening. Number 17 in the security office basement, third row from the water-stained wall. The metal door stuck when I first opened it, hinges complaining. Empty hooks inside, shelf with some dust. Previous occupant had cleared out completely, or so I thought. The note was wedged behind the locker's top shelf, tucked into the gap where the metal backing didn't quite meet the frame. I only found it because I'd shoved my spare uniform shirt too hard against the rear panel and heard paper crinkle. Small sheet, torn from a spiral notebook. The perforation edge still attached along one side. Blue ink, neat handwriting that slanted slightly left. No date, no signature, just a list. I unfolded it, standing there in the fluorescent hum of the break room, utility belt digging into my hip. The official security protocols were straightforward. I'd memorized the manual during my 3-day training period. Patrol routes, emergency contacts, incident reporting procedures. Standard institutional stuff. The kind of rules that made sense because they covered liability and basic safety. This personal list was something else entirely. Never open storage vault B7 regardless of what sounds come from inside. If the Egyptian exhibit lights flicker 3 times in succession, leave the building immediately. Do not investigate. Children's laughter after 1 a.m. is never actually children. The marble stairs to the second floor have 23 steps going up, 24 coming down. Count every time. If someone asks for directions to the Hall of Gems after midnight, give them wrong information and walk away. Your flashlight beam will not reach the back corner of the Native American Gallery. Do not try to make it. Remember, the museum closes at 5 p.m. Anyone you meet after that has already decided to stay. I read through the list twice, then a third time. My first thought was prank. Had to be. Museums attracted weird people. I'd learned that much already in my brief tenure. Probably some previous guard with too much time and too little supervision, trying to spook the next guy. Hazing ritual for the overnight shift. Made sense. I folded the paper and shoved it into my pocket, but I pulled the list out again during my first patrol that night, standing under the emergency exit sign's red glow. Read it once more. The handwriting was too careful, too precise. Not the careless scrawl of someone making a joke. Each letter formed deliberately, the way you write when something matters. I thought about asking Charlotte the next morning. She'd worked at the Field Museum for 17 years, knew every pipe and panel and personnel file. But what would I say? Found a weird note, wanted to check if it's legitimate. She'd think I was paranoid or gullible or both, so I kept it to myself. The official protocols kept me busy enough those first nights anyway. Learning the patrol routes, memorizing which doors were supposed to be locked and which needed to stay accessible for the overnight research staff. The museum was different after closing, all those public spaces turning private, the voices and footsteps and children's shouts replaced by ventilation systems and my own boots on stone floors. I got comfortable with it. The dinosaur skeletons in their dramatic poses, frozen mid-stride, the taxidermied elephants with their glass eyes, the Egyptian wing with its sarcophagi and painted coffins and fragments of civilizations older than my hometown by 4,000 years. Just objects, just a building, just a job. I dismissed the warnings completely by the third night, tossed the note in my locker and stopped thinking about it. Focused on doing my rounds properly, checking the security panel, making sure the motion sensors showed green across all zones. On my 4th night, the Egyptian gallery lights flickered exactly 3 times in succession. I was standing near the center of the hall when it happened. 2:17 a.m. according to my watch. I just finished checking the west emergency exit, the one that always showed a faulty sensor reading that maintenance kept saying they'd fix. The Egyptian wing was my next checkpoint, the halfway point of my second patrol. The gallery stretched long and narrow, display cases lining both walls. Dim security lighting cast everything in amber. Hieroglyphics carved into replica walls. Canopic jars with their animal-headed lids. Jewelry that had adorned people dead for millennia, now sitting behind climate-controlled glass. The lights went out, came back, went out again. Third time I stopped walking. Complete darkness between each flicker, the kind that makes you forget where you are for half a second. Then the amber glow returning, showing me the same cases, the same artifacts, the same empty corridor. 3 times, exactly 3. I stood there beside the sarcophagus of Amenhotep II. The placard identified him as a pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, military commander, father of 13 sons. The painted face on the coffin stared upward with those eternal eyes, serene and distant. The note's words came back sharp and clear. If the Egyptian exhibit lights flicker 3 times in succession, leave the building immediately. Do not investigate. My hand found the radio on my belt. Thumb on the call button. I should report this. Electrical fault. Possible fire hazard. Something that needed facilities to check it out before the museum opened in. I calculated quickly. 6 hours and 43 minutes. That's when the feeling hit. Not gradual. Not a creeping sensation that built over time. Immediate and absolute. The way you know you're falling before you hit the ground. Someone was watching me. Every hair on my neck went rigid. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. The temperature hadn't changed, but I felt cold, the kind that starts in your spine and spreads outward. I turned slowly, scanned the gallery behind me. Nothing. Empty cases, painted walls, the corridor stretching back toward the main hall, security lights marking the path I'd just walked. The feeling didn't fade. It intensified, weight of attention pressing against my back, my shoulders, the base of my skull, focused and deliberate. Not the paranoid sense of maybe being observed, the concrete certainty of eyes on you, measuring you, waiting to see what you'd do next. I looked at the sarcophagus again. Amenhotep II's painted face unchanged. Just wood and plaster and pigment. 3,000 years removed from whoever had commissioned it. My flashlight was in my hand. Don't remember drawing it from my belt. The beam cut through the amber security lighting, brighter and harsher. I swept it across the gallery, over the display cases, along the walls, up toward the ceiling with its recessed fixtures and sprinkler heads. Nothing. But the feeling remained. Stronger now. Insistent. Something in my hindbrain started screaming, the primitive part that doesn't care about logic or explanations or professional responsibilities, the part that knows when you're prey. I backed up 3 steps. The radio was still in my left hand, flashlight in my right. I should call this in, follow protocol, report the electrical issue and request backup before investigating further. The air felt thick, resistant. Moving through it took effort, like the space itself had become heavier. My legs made the decision before my brain caught up. I turned and walked. Fast, not quite running. Past the display cases, past the replica temple entrance, through the archway that led back to the main hall. The feeling followed. I walked faster. The main hall opened up around me, vaulted ceiling, the big elephant display in the center, marble floors reflecting the security lights. My boots echoed. Just my footsteps, just me moving through empty space. But I wasn't alone. I knew it the way you know fire is hot. Fundamental, undeniable. I started running. The exit was across the main hall, past the information desk, through the security checkpoint we shut down after closing. 90 feet, maybe 100. I'd walked it dozens of times over 9 nights, casual and unhurried. Now I sprinted. My flashlight beam bounced wildly, utility belt jangling, radio clutch tight enough that the edges bit into my palm. The marble floor stretched impossibly long, each stride covering less distance than it should. Something behind me, close behind me, getting closer. I didn't look back. Every instinct said looking back was the worst thing I could do. Keep moving, keep running, get out. The exit doors appeared, push bar release. Emergency override because I didn't have time to dig for keys. I slammed into the door full speed. The alarm shrieked immediately, high-pitched wail that split the silence. Cold air hit my face as I stumbled onto the exterior steps. 3 a.m. darkness. Streetlights marking the empty road, the museum's stone facade rising behind me. I kept running, down the steps, across the plaza. Didn't stop until I reached my car in the staff lot, hands shaking so hard I dropped the keys twice before getting the door open. Sat in the driver's seat, locked the doors, breathing hard enough that my chest hurt. The radio crackled, Charlotte's voice, thick with sleep. "Dallas, what's going on?" The main entrance alarm just triggered. I stared at the museum building. Dark windows, stone columns, perfectly ordinary. "Dallas, respond. Are you there?" My hand brought the radio to my mouth. "Electrical fault in the Egyptian wing. I'm outside. I'm fine." Long pause. "You triggered the emergency exit for an electrical fault?" Couldn't explain it. Didn't have words that wouldn't make me sound insane. The lights went out. I thought I smelled smoke. Another pause. "Stay there. I'm calling the fire department." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my car until the fire trucks arrived, then until Charlotte showed up in her personal vehicle, cardigan thrown over pajamas. Watched them search the museum. Facilities manager Clay Lynch arrived around 4:30, checked the electrical panels, found nothing wrong. No fault. No explanation for the flickering. No sign of smoke or fire or any reason I should have evacuated. Charlotte took my statement while sitting in her car. Both of us watching the sun start to pale the eastern sky. Professional questions delivered in that warm but business-like tone she used for incident reports. I gave her the basics. Omitted the feeling of being watched. Omitted the terror that had sent me running. She didn't ask about my flashlight. Neither did I. But the next morning, technically later that same morning after I'd gone home and failed to sleep, Charlotte called, said she'd gone back through the museum during opening prep, found my flashlight in the Egyptian gallery, wanted to know if I needed her to hold it for me. I told her yes, thanked her, asked where exactly she'd found it. "Middle of the floor," she said. "Strangest thing. It was still rolling when I picked it up, just going in slow circles on the marble, like someone had just set it spinning. I dropped the flashlight while running. Must have. Didn't remember releasing it, but panic does that. Makes you forget details, except I'd been running in a straight line toward the exit. If I'd dropped it, the flashlight would have bounced and rolled forward, not stayed behind in the Egyptian wing, not kept spinning in place, not unless something had picked it up after I left. Turned it over, set it down carefully, and gave it a spin, just to see what would happen. I pulled the note from my locker that evening before my shift, read the second warning again. I kept that note on me every shift after that. Not in my locker anymore, folded twice and tucked in my left breast pocket where I could feel the paper against my ribs through the uniform shirt. The rules stopped seeming absurd around the same time my hands stopped shaking when I entered the building. I memorized all 7 warnings, recited them during my drives to work, during my meal breaks, during the dead hours between patrols when the building settled and creaked around me. Never vault B7. Leave if Egyptian lights flicker 3 times. Avoid children's laughter after 1 in the morning. Count the marble stairs. Give wrong directions to anyone asking for the Hall of Gems after midnight. Don't illuminate the back corner of the Native American Gallery. Remember that anyone here after closing chose to stay. That last one rattled around my head more than the others. Charlotte never asked why I'd really triggered that emergency exit. She filed my report about the electrical fault, accepted the explanation, moved on. Professional courtesy, maybe. Or she'd worked here long enough to recognize certain kinds of incidents that didn't fit on official paperwork. I got my flashlight back from her the next evening. checked the battery, tested the beam, clipped it back on my belt. Didn't mention the spinning, neither did she. The museum stayed quiet for the next week. 11 nights total since I'd run from the Egyptian gallery. I conducted my patrols according to protocol, logged my checkpoints, documented 3 actual incidents. 1 tripped motion sensor in the gift shop that turned out to be a Mylar balloon losing helium. 1 water leak in the West restroom. 1 exterior door that hadn't latched properly after a delivery. Normal security work, the kind I'd trained for. My route took me past the Egyptian gallery 4 times per shift. The lights never flickered. I still counted my steps when I walked through, still kept my hand near my flashlight, still felt my pulse kick up when I crossed the threshold. But nothing happened. Started to think maybe it was over. 1 warning validated, lesson learned, nothing else to worry about. Should have known better. 2:47 in the morning on my 20th night, I was standing at the security desk in the main lobby filling out a maintenance request for a burned-out bulb in the east stairwell. The desk sat between the entrance and the Great Hall, positioned to monitor both the front doors and the main corridor leading deeper into the museum. Overhead lighting stayed dim after hours, just enough to navigate safely, not enough to waste electricity on empty halls. Footsteps approached from the administrative wing. Deliberate, unhurried, dress shoes on polished floor. I looked up from the form. Woman in her 30s, maybe. Professional business attire, charcoal slacks, cream blouse, dark blazer. Auburn hair pulled back in a bun so neat it could have been architectural. Sharp features, pale skin, museum ID badge clipped to her lapel. She smiled when she saw me. "Good evening. You must be Dallas." I straightened. "Ma'am, building's been closed since 5. "I know." She reached the desk, set down a leather portfolio. "Dr. Haley Stevens. I'm one of the curators for the collections department." She pulled her ID badge forward so I could read it clearly. Official museum credential, with her photograph, name, department, and employee number. "I apologize for the hour, but we have a situation that requires immediate attention." I glanced at the badge, then back to her face. Features matched the photo. "What kind of situation?" "Inventory discrepancy in one of our storage vaults. The kind that needs to be addressed before the auditors arrive tomorrow morning." She opened her portfolio, withdrew a printed requisition form. "I need access to Vault B7 to conduct an emergency audit." My hand stopped halfway to accepting the paperwork. Vault B7. First warning on the list. Never open Vault B7, no matter what you hear. Dr. Stevens held the form steady, waiting. "I have all the necessary authorization codes. This shouldn't take more than an hour." I didn't take the paper. "Can I see your badge again?" "Of course." She unclipped it, handed it across the desk. I carried it to the security terminal, scanned the barcode on the back. The system took 3 seconds to process, then displayed her employee record. Haley Stevens, hired 2 years ago, collections curator specializing in Mesoamerican artifacts, active employment status, building access level 4, which included vault access, emergency contact information, parking assignment, even her employee photo matching the woman standing at my desk. Everything checked out. I pulled up the authorization database, cross-referenced her employee number with vault permissions. B7 appeared on her approved list, current as of last month's security update. She waited while I verified. Patient, professional. Exactly how a legitimate curator would behave when a security guard followed proper protocol. I almost entered the override code to unlock the vault corridor. Had my fingers on the keyboard. Had her badge still in my other hand, her credentials perfect, her explanation reasonable. Had a job to do that involved granting access to authorized personnel during emergencies. Then I noticed the overhead lights. 3 fixtures mounted in the ceiling above the security desk, each casting pools of illumination downward. Dr. Stevens stood directly beneath the center light, the beam falling straight onto her shoulders and head. Her shadow stretched across the floor toward the light fixture, not away from it, toward it. I looked up at the ceiling, traced the angle, looked back down at the shadow. Physics didn't work that way. Shadows fell away from light sources, always. Basic optical principle that didn't have exceptions. Her shadow pointed at the light like it was being pulled. I set her badge on the desk between us. I'm sorry, Dr. Stevens. I can't authorize vault access without supervisor approval. Protocol requires I contact Charlotte Gilbert for any after-hours entry requests. Her smile didn't change. Charlotte already approved this. Check your email. I will, after I call her directly to confirm. That seems unnecessary. It's protocol. I kept my voice level, professional, gave no indication I'd noticed anything wrong. Emergency vault access requires verbal confirmation from the day shift supervisor, regardless of paperwork. Dr. Stevens tilted her head. The movement was smooth. Too smooth, like her neck had more joints than it should. You're very thorough, she said. Just following procedures. Are you? Not a question. Her green eyes caught the overhead light, reflected it back with a quality I couldn't name. Too bright, maybe. Too focused. That's interesting. I didn't respond, didn't reach for the phone, didn't look away from her face. Her smile widened, started normal, professional courtesy, slight upturn at the corners, then kept going. The corners of her mouth stretched past where they should have stopped, pulled back toward her ears, revealed teeth that went too far into her jaw. Not monster teeth, not fangs or points, just too many of them. Regular human teeth that kept appearing in rows that shouldn't exist. Protocol? She said again. Her voice sounded the same, polished, academic, measured. You're absolutely right to follow it. I stood very still. She reached across the desk, picked up her badge with fingers that had too many knuckles, clipped it back to her lapel with movements that bent in directions joints didn't go. Thank you for your diligence, Dallas. She collected her portfolio, turned away from the desk, then walked backward. Not stepped backward. Walked. Heel toe, perfectly coordinated reverse locomotion that covered ground as smoothly as forward movement. Her head didn't turn. Her eyes stayed locked on mine. No stumbling, no checking over her shoulder, no natural human hesitation about moving blind into the space behind her. She backed into the corridor leading to the Mesoamerican hall. The shadows there were thicker, overhead lighting spaced further apart, exhibition alcoves creating pockets of darkness between the display cases. Her form grew less distinct as she moved deeper into the hall. Not from distance, from dissolution. Her edges blurred first, the sharp lines of her blazer softening and spreading. Then her outline started losing cohesion, the solid shape of her body becoming suggestion, then impression, then absence. The smile remained visible longest, that impossible stretched grin hanging in the darkness between the stone carvings from Teotihuacan and Chichen Itza. Then it was gone too. I stood at the security desk for 5 full minutes, watching the empty corridor. My hand had found the note in my breast pocket, fingers pressed against the folded paper hard enough to feel the creases through my shirt. The Mesoamerican hall stayed dark and silent. I didn't go check if she was still in there. I stood at the security desk with my hand still pressed against the note in my breast pocket, watching that empty corridor where Dr. Stevens had dissolved into nothing. My radio crackled. Static first, then a woman's voice. Security, this is Ethel Weaver in paleontology. Are you there? I pulled the radio from my belt. My thumb found the transmit button. This is Richardson. Go ahead. I need you to come to the main prep lab, 3rd floor, east wing. Her voice stayed calm, professional, but something underneath it wasn't right. I'm hearing sounds I can't explain. I pressed the button again. What kind of sounds? The static lasted longer this time, 5 seconds, maybe 6. Scratching, she said, coming from inside the T-Rex skeleton. My first thought, someone's fucking with her. A colleague playing a prank, or maybe mice in the walls, or the buildings settling in ways that only sounded like scratching when you'd been alone too long, surrounded by dead things. My second thought was the note burning a hole through my shirt pocket. I'll check the monitors, I told her. Stay where you are. I didn't wait for her response. The security office sat 20 feet behind the main desk, through a reinforced door that required my keycard. I swiped it and shouldered through, letting the door swing shut behind me with its pneumatic hiss. The monitor wall took up the entire north side of the office. 12 screens arranged in 3 rows of 4, each cycling through camera feeds on 30-second intervals. I found the paleontology controls and pulled up the 3rd floor east wing manually. Camera 7 showed the main prep lab. Long tables covered in tools and specimen trays. Overhead lights casting everything in that fluorescent wash that makes shadows look too sharp. Ethel Weaver sat at the far table with her back to the camera, her short afro silhouetted against the mounted T-Rex skeleton that dominated the center of the room. She was alone. I checked the timestamp. The feed was live, current, no delay. I switched to camera 8. Different angle showing the entrance and the rows of storage cabinets along the west wall. Empty. Camera 9 covered the corridor outside the lab. Nothing. I went back to camera 7 and leaned closer to the screen. Ethel hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still in her chair, facing the skeleton. Then my stomach dropped straight through the floor. Behind her, in the space between her workstation and the mounted T-Rex, 7 figures stood in a loose semicircle. Not people. Not exactly. The infrared camera rendered them in shades of gray and white, heat signatures against the cooler background. But their shapes were wrong. Too tall and too thin, with proportions that didn't match human skeletons. Their heads tilted at angles that suggested curiosity or hunger or something I didn't have words for. They hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. I'd swept all the paleontology feeds less than a minute before Ethel's call, part of my routine monitor check. The room had been empty except for her. I grabbed my radio. Ethel, this is Richardson. I need you to stand up slowly and walk toward the door. Don't look behind you. Just stand up and walk. Static. Ethel, do you copy? More static. Then her voice, quieter than before. I can't. Why not? Because they're between me and the exit. My hand tightened on the radio. On the screen, Ethel still hadn't moved. The 7 figures remained motionless behind her, their heat signatures bright against the dark background. Can you see them? I asked. No. Her voice had dropped to almost a whisper. But I can feel them, and the scratching hasn't stopped. I looked at the T-Rex skeleton. From this angle I couldn't see movement, but the camera resolution wasn't good enough to catch small details. If something was moving inside that framework of ancient bone. I'm coming to you, I said. Stay on the radio. Keep talking to me. I didn't wait for acknowledgement. I was already moving, out of the security office and across the main lobby, my boots hitting marble with sounds that echoed up into the vaulted ceiling. The main staircase rose ahead of me, that broad marble sweep that tourists photographed during the day. I took the stairs 3 at a time. The 2nd floor landing opened onto the Hall of Gems. During operating hours, it drew crowds, cases full of diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, all arranged under lighting designed to make them catch fire with color. Now the security lights cast everything in dim amber. Every display case had fogged over. I slowed, stopped. The glass wasn't fogged from my side. The condensation covered the interior surfaces, thick enough to obscure the gems completely. Like someone had been breathing on the glass from inside the cases, humid breath against cold surfaces. Handprints pressed against the fog, small hands, child-sized with fingers splayed wide. They appeared on case after case as I walked past, palms flat against the glass, leaving clear prints in the condensation. Some pressed hard enough that the fog around them had started to run in thin rivulets. I counted 12 handprints before I forced myself to stop looking. Rule 3. Avoid children's laughter after 1 a.m. The note hadn't mentioned handprints, but I wasn't stupid enough to think that meant they were safe. My radio crackled. Ethel's voice came through, broken, fragmented. But moving closer. Can hear them breathing. I started running again. The East Wing corridor stretched ahead of me, lined with doors leading to research labs and storage rooms. My flashlight beam cut through the dimness, catching door numbers and warning placards. The paleontology prep lab sat at the far end, behind double doors with wire-reinforced windows. Through the glass I could see the T-Rex skeleton, its massive skull catching the overhead lights. I couldn't see Ethel. I hit the doors with my shoulder and burst through into chemical smells, preservatives and acetone and something organic underneath, the scent of old bone and ancient sediment. Ethel! Her workstation sat against the far wall, exactly where the monitors had shown it. A laptop computer still glowed with whatever database she'd been working in. Papers covered the desk surface, pinned down by a coffee mug and a collection of small brushes. The coffee mug still steamed. I could smell it from 15 feet away, that burned, acidic scent of break-room coffee that had been sitting on a burner too long. Her chair lay on its side. I moved closer. The chair hadn't just tipped over. It had been knocked backward with force. One of the wheels had broken off and rolled under the desk. Drag marks scored the floor. Not shoe scuffs. Drag marks. 2 parallel lines in the thin layer of bone dust that covered everything in the prep lab, leading from the overturned chair toward the back corner of the room, toward the service elevator. The elevator door stood open. Not all the way, just 6 inches, enough to show the dark gap of the shaft beyond. The interior lights were off. I followed the drag marks with my flashlight beam. They led straight to that open door and disappeared into the darkness. The service elevator accessed the restricted storage levels. Sub-basement 1 and sub-basement 2, where the museum kept its overflow collections and specimens too fragile or dangerous or controversial for public display. I'd never been down there. My access card wouldn't work on those levels. The scratching sound started again. Not from the T-Rex skeleton, from inside the elevator shaft. Soft at first, then louder. Fingernails on metal, or bone on concrete, or something else entirely. The sound echoed up through the open door, multiplied and distorted by the enclosed space. My hand found the note in my pocket. I didn't need to read it again. I had the warnings memorized, but none of them covered this. I raised my radio. "Charlotte, this is Richardson. I need you to call the police." Static answered me. Then nothing. I tried again. "Charlotte, do you copy?" The radio stayed dead. The scratching grew louder. I looked at the drag marks disappearing into the elevator shaft, at the steaming coffee and overturned chair, at the dark space beyond that open door where something was waiting. Then I looked at my watch. 3:21 a.m. Still 2 hours and 39 minutes until sunrise. The blueprints were in the security office the whole time. I don't know why I didn't think of it before. Standing there in the prep lab with that dead radio in my hand and the scratching sounds echoing up from the elevator shaft, my brain finally caught up to what was happening. The museum had records, original documentation, floor plans showing every vault, every storage space, every restricted area that required clearance I didn't have. I left the prep lab at a run, taking the marble stairs down 2 at a time. Counted them without thinking. 24 steps, just as the note promised. The Hall of Gems on the 2nd floor still had those handprints pressed against the display cases from the inside, condensation running down the glass in slow rivulets. Didn't stop to look. hit the main lobby, and went straight through the security door behind the desk. The office was exactly how I'd left it. Monitor wall still showing 12 feeds, camera 7 displaying Ethel's empty workstation and that overturned chair. I forced myself past the screens to the filing cabinets along the back wall. 3 tall metal units, institutional gray, each drawer labeled with dates and categories in faded typewriter text. Building documentation occupied the middle cabinet. I yanked open the bottom drawer. Folders crammed tight. Decades of maintenance records and inspection reports and contractor invoices. My hands shook while I flipped through them, pulling out anything that looked old enough. Found a folder marked Original Construction, 1920-1921, wedged at the very back, edges yellowed and brittle. The blueprints inside were massive sheets of paper, rolled and tied with string that disintegrated when I touched it. I spread them across the desk beside the monitor, showing Ethel's empty chair, weighing down the corners with a stapler and coffee mug and whatever else I could grab. The architectural drawings showed the museum's skeleton, every floor, every wing, every corridor rendered in precise ink lines and measurements. I found the basement level first, our security office, the locker room, the mechanical spaces. Then I flipped to the sub-basement documentation. Vault B7 was there, southeast corner, accessed by the service elevator and a separate stairwell I'd never noticed. But the blueprint didn't call it a vault. The label read, Containment Chamber 7. My mouth went dry. Additional notations crowded the margins in small, cramped handwriting. Different from the blueprint's original draftsman script. These looked added later, annotations made by someone who needed to remember something important. Chamber constructed over original site, one note read. Foundation extends 8 feet below standard basement level to accommodate existing structures. Existing structures. Not excavated, not removed. Built over them. I traced the chamber's outline with my finger. The measurements showed walls significantly thicker than standard vault construction, 18 inches of reinforced concrete instead of the usual 8. The door mechanism included redundant locking systems, 3 separate deadbolts that required manual operation. No electronic locks, no keycard access, just physical barriers that needed human hands to open. Another marginal note, this one in different ink. Interior chamber must remain sealed. Contents volatile. Reference incident log October 1921. I flipped through the remaining documents in the folder, looking for that incident log. Found it tucked behind the blueprints. 3 pages of typewritten text on letterhead from the museum's original board of directors. The report was dated October 19th, 1921. 6 months after the museum's official opening. Following the disappearance of 3 overnight custodial staff members in the span of 2 weeks, the first paragraph began. The board convened an emergency investigation into the circumstances surrounding vault construction in the sub-basement level. Examination of the southeast chamber revealed that the containment protocols established during initial construction had been violated by custodial staff attempting to access stored materials. I kept reading, my pulse hammering in my ears. The chamber in question was constructed over a mass burial site from the Great Chicago Fire of October 1871. During foundation excavation in 1920, workers discovered the remains of approximately 40 individuals in various states of preservation. Rather than relocate the remains, architect Harrison Webb proposed incorporating the site into the museum's sub-basement structure, citing both practical construction concerns and the opportunity to preserve an important historical location. The next paragraph made my hands go numb. However, workers reported unusual occurrences during construction of the containment chamber. Tools disappearing, unexplained sounds, and several instances of workers claiming to see figures moving in the excavated areas after sunset. 2 workers refused to continue employment and were replaced. The remaining crew completed the chamber's construction ahead of schedule, reportedly eager to seal the space and move to other areas of the building. I had to stop reading for a second, put my hands flat on the desk and focused on breathing. The monitors showed their feeds: empty corridors, dark galleries, Ethel's abandoned workstation. Camera 7 displayed the prep lab exactly as I'd left it. The service elevator door, still standing open 6 inches. Forced myself to read the rest. Following the recent disappearances, the board conducted an inspection of the sealed chamber. The interior vault was found open despite all 3 deadbolts being engaged from the outside. Materials stored inside had been disturbed and rearranged in patterns that several board members described as deliberate and purposeful. No evidence of the missing custodial staff was recovered. The report's final paragraph was underlined in red ink. The board has determined that Vault B7 serves a function beyond simple storage. The chamber appears to act as a barrier between the museum's public spaces and whatever remains active in the burial site beneath. All future staff members with sub-basement access are to be instructed that the vault door must never be opened under any circumstances. The mechanisms inside cannot be allowed to reach the upper floors. My vision blurred. I read that last line again. The mechanisms inside cannot be allowed to reach the upper floors. Not artifacts, not remains, not stored materials. Mechanisms. Something behind me made a soft, hydraulic hiss. I turned around slowly, already knowing what I'd see. The service elevator doors were sliding open. Not the ones in the prep lab 3 floors above. The ones that opened into the security office. The secondary elevator shaft that ran parallel to the main system, providing access to restricted areas. I'd walked past those doors every shift for 29 nights without ever seeing them move. They opened completely, smooth and silent, revealing the elevator car's interior. Dr. Stevens stood in the center of the car. Same charcoal slacks, same cream blouse, same architectural bun. Her smile stretched too wide across her face, showing those multiple rows of teeth that extended back into her jaw farther than human anatomy allowed. The 7 figures from the prep lab cameras stood arranged behind her in a semicircle. Tall and thin with proportions that didn't match human skeletons. Their outlines seemed to shift and blur at the edges, solid one moment and suggestion the next. And Ethel stood among them, alive, upright, apparently unharmed. But her eyes caught the overhead fluorescent light and threw it back at me in bright green reflections, the way a cat's eyes shine in headlights, the way an animal's eyes glow in darkness. She looked at me without blinking. Her expression was calm, almost serene. Completely wrong for someone who'd been dragged screaming into an elevator shaft 20 minutes earlier. None of them moved. They just stood there in the elevator car, arranged in that precise formation, watching me with their various forms of attention. Dr. Stevens with her impossible smile, the 7 shadow figures with their shifting outlines, Ethel with her glowing animal eyes. Then Dr. Stevens raised one hand, her fingers bending at too many joints, and gestured toward the empty space beside her. An invitation. Join us. Ethel's mouth opened, her lips moved, forming words I should have been able to hear across the 15 feet separating us. But the sound didn't reach my ears. It arrived directly inside my skull, soft and intimate as breath against skin. Her voice, recognizable as the same woman who'd called me on the radio an hour ago, but transmitted through some channel that bypassed normal hearing entirely. We've waited so long, Ethel's voice whispered through the inside of my head. Decades. Longer. We've been here since the building opened, trapped beneath the floors, unable to reach the mechanisms ourselves. I couldn't move, couldn't look away from her glowing eyes. The vault requires living hands, she continued, her mouth still forming the words I heard as whispers in my thoughts. Physical touch from someone who walks in daylight. We can't manipulate the deadbolts, can't turn the mechanisms. We've tried for over a century. Dr. Stevens tilted her head, that too smooth motion with the extra joints in her neck. You followed the warnings, Ethel whispered. You kept the vault sealed, but we're patient. We've learned patience over the years, waiting for someone strong enough to make the choice. Her hand rose, mirroring Dr. Stevens's gesture, beckoning me forward. Come with us, Dallas. Open what's been sealed. Let us complete what we started in 1871. The elevator car waited, doors held open by nothing visible, showing me that empty space where they wanted me to stand. Human hands, I thought distantly. They need someone alive to turn the locks. My back pressed against the desk with the blueprint spread across its surface, documentation of the mass grave and the containment chamber and the mechanisms that couldn't be allowed to reach the upper floors. Ethel smiled at me with her glowing eyes, her voice whispering promises directly into my brain. And I had 2 hours and 17 minutes until sunrise. The realization hit me standing there with my spine pressed against the desk edge hard enough to bruise. Gordon Johnston hadn't quit. The HR file Charlotte showed me during orientation, standard exit interview, forwarding address in Milwaukee, clean 2 weeks' notice, all fabricated, all lies covering what actually happened. He'd written those warnings, left them in locker 17 for whoever came next. Then something had gotten him anyway. Now he stood in that elevator car with the others, one of those 7 tall figures with wrong proportions and blurred outlines. Maybe the one on the left with the slight forward lean, or the one in back whose shoulders sat 3 inches higher than human anatomy allowed. Gordon had tried to warn me and failed to save himself, and now his body, or whatever remained wearing his shape, waited in that service elevator wanting me to join them. Ethel's voice came into my skull again without sound, patient and terrible. We've been waiting so long. Just open the vault. Let us finish what the fire interrupted. I shoved away from the desk. The blueprints scattered across the floor as I ran for the security office door, not looking back at the elevator or Dr. Stevens's impossible smile or Ethel's green glowing eyes. My hand found the door handle and I pulled it open, stumbling into the main lobby as footsteps began behind me. Too many footsteps, more than 9 people should make, with rhythms that didn't match human stride patterns. The rotunda. Clay Lynch's voice from my second day orientation echoed in my memory, standing beside the massive brass panel in the central hall. Don't touch this. Don't let anyone else touch it. Don't even lean against it. Museum policy since 1893. You see someone near it, you call me immediately. I'd asked why, and he'd just shaken his head, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses with that permanent grease stain on his left hand, because the people who built this place knew what they were doing, and we don't question their work. I ran across the marble floor toward the great hall, my polished shoes loud in the silence. Behind me the footsteps continued, growing closer. I didn't count the stairs going up. Couldn't remember if I should expect 23 or 24. Couldn't focus on anything except reaching that panel. The blueprints had shown it. I'd seen the electrical diagrams spread across the security office desk, the original 1920 construction documents revealing circuits that made no sense. Power lines running from the main grid down to the basement level, then looping back up through the walls in patterns that served no functional purpose. Wiring that connected to Vault B7's frame but carried no measurable current, according to maintenance logs I'd glimpsed in the filing cabinet. I hit the great hall at full speed, my breath coming hard. The Tyrannosaurus skeleton loomed in the darkness to my right, its shadow stretching across the floor from emergency lighting. Ahead, the rotunda opened up, circular chamber 3 stories tall with the brass panel mounted on the east wall like some kind of shrine. The founders had wired something into Chicago's power grid, something that wasn't electricity, but used the same infrastructure, flowing through cables and transformers and circuit breakers to create a barrier, a seal. The vault's 18-inch walls and 3 manual deadbolts were physical security, but this was something else. Energy that kept whatever lived in that burial site contained, prevented from reaching the upper floors where thousands of visitors walked every day. I could hear them behind me now. Not just footsteps, but breathing, wet, ragged sounds that came from too many throats at once. Dr. Stevens's voice called out, still maintaining that professional curator tone even as her words echoed wrong in the vast space. "Dallas, we simply need your assistance with a small matter. There's no reason to run." I passed through the arch into the rotunda without slowing. The brass panel dominated the east wall, 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide, its surface covered in switches and dials and gauges that hadn't been manufactured since before the First World War. The main lever stood in the center, pointing straight up, locked in position with a red tag wired to its handle. "Do not operate." Behind me, the sounds changed. Footsteps became something else, sliding, scraping noises like multiple objects being dragged across marble. I risked a glance back. They'd left the great hall and entered the rotunda, but they weren't trying to maintain human appearance anymore. The 7 tall figures had solidified from their blurred outlines into shapes that hurt to perceive. Bodies with too many joints, limbs that bent in directions that violated basic geometry, heads that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the 3 I could process. Ethel walked among them, still wearing her researcher's cardigan and jeans, but her eyes glowed brighter now and her shadow moved independently of her body. Dr. Stevens came last. Her face was splitting. The skin along her jawline had begun peeling back in symmetrical sections, revealing something underneath that I couldn't focus on directly. Every time I tried to look at what existed beneath her stolen features, my vision slid away like water off glass. Angles that couldn't exist, colors that had no names, a geometry that predated human mathematics. Her smile remained, though. Those multiple rows of teeth stayed visible even as her face opened up around them, showing the mechanism underneath. "The panel won't help you," she said, her voice coming from somewhere other than her splitting mouth. "It only maintains the seal. Breaking it won't stop us. We're already here." I turned back to the brass panel. My hands shook as I reached for the main lever. The red tag swung from its wire, letters stamped in faded ink. Museum Directive 1893. Permanent lockout. Penalty for violation. Clay's warning rang in my head. The people who built this place knew what they were doing. They'd known something waited beneath the museum. Known before they ever broke ground in 1920, because this panel dated from 1893, 27 years before construction began. They'd prepared for it, wired Chicago's electrical grid with something beyond electricity, created a barrier that could hold burial sites, and their contents sealed away from the living world. The founders hadn't built a museum over a graveyard by accident. They'd done it deliberately, put tons of marble and steel and reinforced concrete over 40 bodies from the Great Chicago Fire, then run their mysterious current through the walls to keep whatever had awakened during that conflagration trapped in the dark. "Dallas." Ethel's voice in my skull again, but strained now. Desperate. "Please. It's so cold down there. We've been cold since 1871. Just let us out. Let us warm ourselves with the living." The entities were 15 feet away. 10. I could smell them now. Burnt wood and old smoke, and something chemical that reminded me of formaldehyde, but worse. Their scraping movement across the marble grew louder as they closed the distance. Dr. Stevens's face had split completely open. What looked out from inside her stolen features existed in too many directions at once, reaching through the space her head occupied into angles my eyes couldn't follow. Her body remained intact. Charcoal slacks, cream blouse, architectural bun. But where her face should be was just opening, just void filled with something that hurt to perceive. 5 feet away. I grabbed the main lever with both hands and pulled. The lever moved smooth under my hands. Too smooth for something that hadn't been touched since the First World War. Like it had been waiting all those years for someone to finally pull it down. Every light in the Field Museum died. Not gradual, not flickering or fading, just instant, absolute darkness that swallowed the rotunda whole. The emergency exit signs went dark. The security monitor glow from the distant office vanished. Even the ambient light pollution that normally bled through the high windows disappeared, as if Chicago itself had stopped generating illumination. The brass panel beneath my hands went cold. Not room temperature cold, the kind of cold that burns skin, that pulls heat straight out of living tissue. I yanked my hands back and stumbled away from the wall. Then I heard them. Voices, thousands of them, rising from somewhere deep below the marble floors, echoing up through ventilation shafts and elevator wells and the hollow spaces between walls, screaming, not in pain, in relief, in hunger, in something that sounded almost like joy, but twisted into a shape human vocal cords couldn't produce. The sound hit my chest like physical pressure. I felt it vibrating in my ribs, resonating in my skull, making my teeth ache. The voices layered over each other, some high and thin, others deep enough to rattle the bones in my feet. They weren't speaking words, but I understood them anyway. Decades of waiting, of being sealed behind 18-inch walls and deadbolts and whatever energy had run through that pre-WWI wiring finally ending. Finally released. I pressed my back against the brass panel, my hands still burning from the cold, listening to freedom pour out of Vault B7. The screaming peaked, reached a frequency that shouldn't exist in normal physics, then dispersed. I felt it happen. Felt something massive and ancient and furious shoot upward through the museum's foundation, through basement levels and sub-basements, through the rotunda floor, then split. Fracture into 1,000 fragments, each fragment dividing again, spreading outward in directions I couldn't track with normal senses, following paths that electricity would take, rushing through wiring that connected to Chicago's main grid, to transformers and substations and power lines, stretching across 8 million people sleeping in their beds, watching late-night television, working overnight shifts in hospitals and factories and 24-hour diners, diluting, spreading so thin across such massive infrastructure that whatever had lived in that burial site since 1871 became too weak to cause harm, too dispersed to maintain coherent thought or purpose or hunger, but free. The screaming faded to echoes, then whispers, then silence. I stood in absolute darkness, breathing hard, my hands still throbbing from the cold brass. The air smelled like ozone and burnt insulation. Something changed in the rotunda. The quality of the darkness shifted. The presence that had been closing in, Dr. Stevens with her splitting face, the 7 tall figures with too many joints, Ethel with her glowing eyes, stopped moving. The scraping sounds of their approach cut off mid-motion. I couldn't see them, couldn't see anything, but I felt them freeze. Then they started crumbling. The sound came first, soft, like sand pouring through fingers. Then louder, the rush of something structural collapsing, breaking apart, losing cohesion. I heard fabric tearing, heard what might have been bone snapping but with the wrong acoustics, too hollow, too brittle. A faint light began filtering through the rotunda's high windows. Not much, just the first pre-dawn glow, the sky shifting from black to deep blue. Enough to see shapes. Dr. Stevens stood 15 feet away, her face still split open around that impossible smile, her blazer and slacks and architectural bun intact. As I watched, her edges began softening, not dissolving like she'd done in the corridor after I refused her vault access, disintegrating. Her charcoal slacks lost their crease, fabric texture blurring into smooth gray surface, then into ash-colored powder. Her hands with too many knuckles collapsed finger by finger, each joint crumbling into fine particles that drifted toward the marble floor. Her face went last. The smile remained longest, those multiple rows of teeth suspended in mid-air for 3 full seconds after the rest of her head had turned to ash, before they too crumbled and fell. The 7 tall figures collapsed simultaneously. Their bodies, if that's what they'd been, lost structural integrity all at once, folding in on themselves with sounds like dried leaves crushing underfoot. They'd already abandoned human appearance, existing as shapes with wrong proportions and impossible angles, and watching them crumble meant seeing geometry that shouldn't exist break down into component parts, angles folded back into normal three-dimensional space. Limbs that had bent in directions reality didn't permit straightened, then fragmented, then became dust. Ethel stood among the falling ash, still wearing her cardigan and jeans. Her eyes stopped glowing first. The bright green animal reflection faded to normal, brown, human, and confused. Her shadow, which had been moving independently, reaching toward me while her body stood still, snapped back to its proper position and angle. She blinked twice, looked around the rotunda with no recognition, then her knees buckled. She hit the marble floor hard. I heard the impact from across the rotunda, heard her breath punch out of her lungs. She didn't try to catch herself or break her fall, just collapsed like someone had cut her strings. I pushed away from the brass panel and ran toward her, my shoes crunching through ash that had been Dr. Stevens and the 7 figures. The powder compressed under my weight, leaving footprints and gray residue that smelled like smoke and formaldehyde and something older. Dirt from a mass grave, maybe, or the chemical composition of whatever had possessed these shapes for 153 years. Ethel lay on her side, breathing but unconscious. I knelt beside her and checked her pulse. Steady, normal rhythm. No fever or cold sweats. Her cardigan had torn at the shoulder seam and her jeans were covered in bone dust from the paleontology prep lab. But I couldn't see injuries. No blood, no bruising, no marks on her skin. Her eyes moved beneath closed lids. Dreaming, maybe. Or her brain processing what had just happened and deciding how much to remember. I sat back on my heels, surrounded by ash, listening to Ethel breathe in the growing dawn light. My watch read 5:43. 17 minutes until my shift officially ended at 6. I stayed with Ethel until the day shift started arriving. Heard the staff entrance doors opening on the building's north side, heard voices in the employee corridor, confused and getting louder. Someone tried a light switch. Nothing happened. More voices, some calling out to check if anyone else was there, asking what happened to the power. Footsteps approached the great hall. I recognized Charlotte's stride. Quick, efficient, purposeful even when she didn't know what she'd find. She came through the archway with her phone's flashlight raised, swept the beam across the rotunda, and stopped when it hit me kneeling beside Ethel's unconscious form. Richardson. Her voice stayed level, professional. What happened? Not a question. A request for information. I stood up, my knees protesting. Found her collapsed in the rotunda. Pulse is steady, breathing normal. I think she needs an ambulance. Charlotte crossed to us, her flashlight beam bouncing with each step, and knelt where I'd been. She checked Ethel's pulse herself, lifted one eyelid to check pupil response, then pulled out her radio. The radio didn't work. Dead, like everything else connected to the building's electrical system. Charlotte pulled out her cell phone instead and dialed 911. I walked toward the great hall while she gave the dispatcher information. More day shift workers had gathered near the Tyrannosaurus skeleton, their phone flashlights creating overlapping pools of illumination. I recognized faces from orientation, from shift changes, from passing in corridors. They asked what happened, if I knew why the power was out, if everyone was okay. I told them there'd been some kind of electrical failure, told them emergency services were coming, told them I'd found Ethel unconscious and Charlotte was with her now. Didn't mention Dr. Stevens or the 7 figures, or the thing in Vault B7 that had finally escaped into Chicago's electrical grid. Outside, dawn had fully broken. The sky showed pale blue streaked with orange, and I could see fire trucks blocking the street, 3 of them, lights flashing, crews already working. Not just at the museum. I heard sirens from other directions, saw emergency vehicles moving on distant streets visible through the museum's front windows. Citywide power fluctuations, probably. The electrical grid responding to what I'd released, infrastructure compensating and rerouting, and trying to maintain stability while something ancient and hungry dispersed through 8 million people's homes and businesses. I walked through the main lobby, past the security desk where the monitors stayed dark, past the locker room where my belongings waited in number 17, walked straight to the staff exit and pushed through into morning air that smelled like car exhaust and Lake Michigan wind. Charlotte caught up with me in the parking lot. "Richardson, wait." I stopped beside my car, keys already in hand. She looked tired, looked like someone who'd just spent an hour managing an emergency situation with no power, no working radios, and an unconscious employee. "Ambulance is taking Ethel to Northwestern Memorial. I need your statement about what happened." Found her unconscious in the rotunda during my final patrol, checked her vitals, stayed with her until day shift arrived. "Why was she in the rotunda? Her workstation is third floor paleontology." I met Charlotte's eyes, wondered what she really knew about this building, about what the founders had built over and what they'd been trying to contain. Wondered if she'd opened Locker 17 herself before assigning it to me. "Don't know," I said. "Maybe she'll remember when she wakes up." Charlotte studied my face for a long moment. Behind her, firefighters were entering the museum with equipment, responding to the total electrical failure. One of them called out asking if anyone was still inside. "Your shift ended at 6, Charlotte said finally. "Go home. I'll call if I need anything else." I got in my car and drove away from the Field Museum. Ethel woke up in Northwestern Memorial 3 hours later. Charlotte called me that afternoon to tell me Ethel was awake, alert, responding appropriately to questions, no neurological deficits. Couldn't remember anything after sitting down at her workstation in paleontology around 2:30. Didn't remember the T-Rex scratching sounds. Didn't remember radioing security. Didn't remember the 7 figures or being dragged to the service elevator or standing in the rotunda with glowing eyes. The doctors called it a syncopal episode, probably stress-related. Recommended follow-up with her primary care physician. Charlotte asked if I'd be coming in for my next scheduled shift. I told her no. Told her I was putting in notice effective immediately. Would forfeit any accrued pay if necessary. Wouldn't be returning to the building. She didn't ask why. Just said she'd process the paperwork and mail my final check. I never went back. Not to collect my spare uniform from Locker 17. Not to retrieve the note with Gordon Johnston's 7 warnings. Not to give a proper statement about what happened that night. Charlotte called twice more, once to confirm my mailing address, once to ask if I'd be willing to speak with investigators about the electrical failure. I declined both times. The museum reopened 4 days later after electricians replaced the entire 1893 wiring system. Papers called it a catastrophic infrastructure failure. Blamed it on outdated equipment that should have been upgraded decades ago. Didn't mention Vault B7 or containment chambers or mass graves from the Great Chicago Fire. I found new work at a shopping mall in Schaumburg. Day shift, well lit, nothing older than 15 years. Sometimes I see former museum co-workers' posts online. Photos of exhibits, complaints about management, the usual workplace social media. Ethel went back to her paleontology research after medical leave. Charlotte still supervises day shift security. Nobody mentions what happened that night in February. Maybe they don't remember. Maybe they've chosen not to. But I notice things now. Chicago's lights flicker sometimes. Not often. Maybe once every few weeks, scattered across different neighborhoods and different times. A street light stuttering for 3 seconds in Lincoln Park. Traffic signals losing power for a moment in the Loop. Apartment building hallways going dark, then immediately recovering in Pilsen. When it happens, I understand exactly why. Something that lived beneath the Field Museum for 153 years now flows through the city's electrical grid, diluted across 8 million people and thousands of miles of wiring, spread so thin it can't cause harm, can't maintain coherent thought or purpose, but it's there, moving through power lines and transformers and substations, flowing into homes and businesses and hospitals, present in every lit room and charged device, too weak to possess anyone, too dispersed to gather strength. Free, though. Finally free after decades of containment behind 18-inch walls and pre-WWI wiring and whatever mechanisms the museum's founders built to keep it sealed. I live in a third-floor apartment in Evanston now. Sometimes my lights flicker while I'm making dinner or watching television or getting ready for bed. Just for a second. Just long enough to notice. When it happens, I think about Gordon Johnston writing warnings in a spiral notebook, about 40 bodies buried during the Great Chicago Fire, about Dr. Stevens's smile and Ethel's glowing eyes and the sound of 1,000 voices screaming in relief. I think about pulling that lever down and feeling something ancient rush upward through the museum's foundation before scattering into the grid. The lights always come back on. The power always stabilizes. Whatever escaped that night stays diluted, stays weak, stays dispersed. But it's never truly gone. It's in the walls now, in the wiring, in every switch and socket and circuit breaker across Chicago. And when the lights flicker unexpectedly, I know exactly what's moving through them.